challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and it is now time for our weekly joint live stream. So, how are you, Peter, on this kind of miserable here Monday? It's dark, wet, cold. I mean, there's nothing to be said for it.
And no good news.
Definitely.
No, I'm still reeling from the events of the weekend, and now kind of collating a lot of what people are saying. Some of it I think is really interesting. Others are just propagandizing, and we're going to be talking about this for a long time.
Right.
You know, oh, they're going home, finally going home to resettle. Really. It depends if you're Alawite, if you're Christian, if you're Shia. The mainstream never talks about any of these things.
No,
okay?
no.
Not at all.
No, that's exactly right. What's always interesting about these things is the mainstream media always has one narrative. The narrative is the fall of the Berlin Wall. Oh, the people are excited. Oh, they're so happy. You know, the rulers have gone. The tyrants are no more. The prisons are open. They do this every time. You know, they did that, of course, obviously in '89, and then of course they did the same thing in Yugoslavia, and then they did that with in Ukraine with Yanukovych. And of course we did that with Saddam Hussein, and then with Gaddafi. It's always the same story. Somehow, oh, the people are out there, you know, they're all celebrating. Now,
the bad guy is gone,
and the
Canadian future is ahead of us.
That's right.
And the West had nothing to do with it.
And of course, even people from whom one would expect better tend to get really stupid at times like this. You know, I remember even the time 2014 with the overthrow of Yanukovych. You know, you had people who seemingly are quite intelligent, rejoicing, oh, this is great. A dictator is gone. Oh, isn't it fantastic? A dictator's gone. It's so dumb. And you say, well, you know, the people who are now in charge, the guy who's in charge, this is the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This is an offshoot of Jabhat al-Nusra. This is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. This is a guy who was number 2 in ISIS. These are jihadis. You think that, oh, well, he's a moderate. You know, you think people just change their views? Oh, yeah, I'm a liberal Democrat now. You know, I changed my views. You know, I read a little bit of the Federalist Papers, and now I've gone over to the other side. No,
got a haircut, trim my beard, I don't wear the usual terrorist garb, and my followers were only. About a third of them can't speak Arabic. They're from Turkmenistan. They're from Chechnya,
right.
And other places. These are professional jihadists. And George, they want to be paid. It's payday.
Okay? No, it's payday. Oh,
but the problem is, Syria is a cadaver now.
Right.
What are you going to pick off those bones?
Right.
Then not much there. Oh, Western news agency. Syria's bank reserves are protected. What? There are but no bank reserves.
There are no bank reserves.
Yeah. And you know, so what it is? Well, I want a house. Okay, I'll take that one. You throw the Christians out, I'll take it right now.
Oh yeah.
If they resist, we'll just shoot them. That's what we did in Idlib. Remember, everybody? Yeah. None of this is reported.
No, of course it isn't. It isn't, because they've got their narrative, and then they have to go with that narrative, and therefore they just keep repeating it. How fantastic, and how this is a springtime of nations. You know, it's like it's and of course they did that at the time of the Arab Spring, which was always a green light for the jihadists. And so at least the jihadists were beaten back at the time of the Arab Spring, but now they're in power, and the media just are pretending that somehow some democracies are now going to spring up, and it's going to be the hated Assad regime is gone. But the fact is, it is obvious that the hated Assad regime is infinitely better than the jihadists. I mean, we know something about these jihadists, and same goes, of course, with Saddam Hussein, and the same goes with Muammar Gaddafi. That these secular leaders, you know, whether they were dictatorial, corrupt, and cruel, and whatever, they're still preferable to the head choppers. Those are people who are the worst. They're very intolerant. They're absolutely savage. And you would have thought that by now, you know, hey, don't you have the experience of Afghanistan to go by? Don't you have the experience of what happened in Syria in 2014 to go by? No, no, no. Let's just go on pretending that this is some kind of a liberation has taken place.
This time it'll be different, George.
It will be different, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
So
I was just going to say, as the story develops, and they're going to stick to this narrative until they have to abandon it. The same thing we saw with Ukraine. But when they say Syria, everyone, keep in mind that country doesn't exist anymore.
No,
it's gone.
No,
it's gone. And it's been up for a while, but yeah, it's gone.
It's gone. Yeah. But I want, I want to show you something that's kind of really awful. And this was the performance of President Biden yesterday. And let's see if we can show this. Because he went out and he gave a presentation.
Talk about cadavers.
Yes, yes, exactly.
I mean, they could just put him in a box and bury him. I mean,
yes.
I'm sorry, but I've been to enough funerals in my life. He looks like he's embalmed.
He really does. He's, you know,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, nobody could accuse him of being a young 81-year-old. Anyway, here he is.
The Assad regime has fallen. This regime brutalized and tortured and killed literally hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians. The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country. It's also a moment of risk and uncertainty. As we all turn to the question of what comes next, the United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity to manage the risks. You know, for years, the main backers of Assad have been Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia. But over the last week, their support collapsed, all three of them. Because all three of them are far weaker today than they were when I took office. Why?
It's about me.
Israel on October the 6th.
It's all about me.
It's all about me. Now, and I think this raises the very serious issue about this. What happened is that, without question, they are taking this as an indication of how weak Russia is and how weak Iran is. And then whenever the West decides somebody is weak, they make a push. I mean, this is the moment to strike. And we had all the gleeful tweets from what's the Polish Prime Minister? I keep saying he's the president. What is it?
Tusk.
Yeah, Tusk, exactly. Duda is the president. Tusk. Say, hey, Russia's really weak. You know, we can beat Russia and its allies. And I responded in the tweet, well, you know, if Russia and its allies had been beaten, Poland would be a province of the 1,000-year Reich. You know, you basically, well, you know, ungrateful bastard. I mean, but you know, that's a different issue.
At a time, everyone, if you look at the history of the Second World War in Eastern Europe, that's the only country that completely disappeared. Was Poland. Right. It was completely part of it.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah, we can beat Russia and its allies, and of course, all the Kaya Kalas, you know, they're all saying. But this is clearly how they're doing it, and you can see it in in Biden taking a victory lap, and of course, it was always clear that this is what they were going to do, and to interpret this. Hey, this is a big victory for us, which is what they did immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall, as as they began pushing for NATO expansion immediately. And then, of course, this is what they did in 2014 with the overthrow of Yanukovych. So yeah, this you can absolutely expect that this is how the West is going to respond.
Biden, at least his administration, is consistent.
Yes.
When they talk about Ukraine, it's about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia. When they talk about Syria, it's about inflicting a strategic defeat on Iran and Russia. And Syria has nothing to do with it. Do you think they really give a hoot one way or another, as long as nobody troubles Israel? Let's let it. Chaos is there, is what they traffic in. Okay, right. If you can't control an outcome, to the most minute detail, chaos is preferable, because you can always use chaos to your advantage. Look at the ebbs and flows and whatnot. I mean, look, during the Obama administration, how many different, even contrasting and conflicting groups in Syria was the U.S. funding? Okay, yeah, that's right. And sometimes the CIA and the Pentagon were funding and training different people that didn't like each other. Okay, that's right. Why? That's because right. Chaos is what they traffic in.
That's exactly right. So can we go back to him? Okay, so we go back to him.
2023, when much of the world responded with horror, Iran and its proxies chose to launch a multi-front war against Israel. That was a historic mistake on Iran's part.
What did you say?
He's going back Iran. A historic mistake on Iran's part. That was for getting involved in, after October the 7th, 2023. And now you're going to say, how did Iran get involved after October the 7th, 2023? That is explained. That's just a given that Iran is always involved.
Territorial proxy, Hezbollah, is also on its back. Only 12 days ago, I spoke from the Rose Garden about the ceasefire deal in Lebanon. A deal that was only possible because Hezbollah has been badly degraded. Meanwhile, Hamas has been badly degraded as well. Iran's own military capabilities have been weakened. Iran tried 2 times to attack Israel. And the United States built a coalition of countries to directly defend Israel and help defeat those attacks. All this made it possible for Iran and Hezbollah to continue to prop up, impossible, I should say, for them to prop up the Assad regime. Additionally, Russia's support for Assad also failed. And that's because Ukraine, backed by our American allies, put up a wall of resistance against the invading Russian forces.
Now, notice he's going on and on and on here, but not really addressing the issue, which is that you have the jihadis have basically taken over a key state in the Levant, and supposedly the United States, it doesn't really like that. But of course, that's of course untrue, because the United States has not ever really opposed these jihadis. And now, and yesterday, the United States launched 75 bombing missions, 75 bombing missions against ISIS.
Or it's against that it's unclear if it was against ISIS. Okay,
exactly. That's what they said.
Against potential groups or militias that could thwart the transition that Syria is going through. I mean, what they want is a completely defenseless, on its back Syria. Okay, and now let the games begin. Okay. Yeah. I mean, okay, George, can you explain to me if it was against ISIS, why they didn't do it 2 weeks ago or 3 months ago?
Well, that's a very good point, and that's really the salient point. 75, that's an awful lot. How come? I mean, the only reason you're there, according to the official rationalizations of the US government. The only reason there's a military presence in Syria, again, Biden makes offers no explanation as to why exactly are US forces in Syria, because they're just there, invited themselves in. But the only reason is we're fighting ISIS. And again, the media dutifully report, oh, the Americans are quite concerned about maybe ISIS may take advantage of the situation. Oh, suddenly ISIS has appeared. We haven't heard anything from ISIS, but ISIS may take advantage of the situation. So if you've been there since 2014, when Obama sent in the US forces, that's 10 years ago, what have you done about ISIS? I mean, how long do you need to be there to go on fighting against ISIS? So they said, we had 75 missions against ISIS. Now, one obvious explanation might be that you basically protecting ISIS, and all this time because you saw the usefulness of ISIS against Bashar al-Assad. Now that Assad is gone, ISIS is not particularly useful to you, so now you can attack them. If, of course, it's true that they attacked ISIS.
What I
don't believe.
I simply assume that those American attacks against Syria were against the remnants of the military of Syria. That's what I assume. That makes perfect logical sense. Okay, yes. Because we know in the waning day or hours, the Syrian forces were making a run for the Iraqi border. Okay, and so Joe Biden, why are U.S. troops are in Syria because of ISIS, or maybe ISIS is in Syria because of U.S. troops?
Well, that's exactly right. But we know all of this that we know. We know from John Kerry that they wanted to use ISIS in order to force out Bashar al-Assad. And again, as the case with Obama and then with Biden, they never really offered an explanation. Why did they want Assad to go? What was it about Assad? I mean, clearly he's a very ineffectual leader. I mean, the whole thing that he was this horrific dictator is belied by his general ineffectualness. And even John Simpson of the BBC I'm no great fan of his. He said, I met Assad. He's a very, very unprepossessing, timid man. I mean, he was unctuous towards me, and I'm just simply a reporter. So the whole this Assad was this terrifying dictator was, of course, always nonsensical. He was never really designated to be his father's successor, because his father's successor was going to be his older brother, who was killed. So he was a trained ophthalmologist. I mean, that's what he got. That's what he studied. He was planning to be an ophthalmologist. It was only because his brother was killed that he sort of was hoisted into the position of power. So he never had anything like his father's.
Also he was never really a reliable ally either. No. Okay, I mean. With Iran, I mean, in 2018, the Russians were looking around and looking at Assad's army and saying, "Okay, well, you won the first round, but you guys are in pretty rough shape right now. I mean, you need to, new training, a more professionalized military." The Russians were willing to help, okay, not to foot the bill for everything. Russia's role has always been very auxiliary in all of this. So there's way too much focus on Syria's defense depending on Russian help. Okay, no, they in September 2015, the alarm bell went off. ISIS is coming to Damascus. The Russians said, "What do you want? Stop the advance." Okay, that's the mission. You killed a lot of people, destroyed a lot of infrastructure. We're done, because Russia didn't make political policy there.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, ultimately, I mean, if you have a client, the client is dependent upon his patron.
Yeah, but there are other players.
And look, I mean, we saw the same thing happens when. Let's say in South Vietnam in 1975. 1972, the South Vietnamese fought off the North Vietnamese offensive. How did they do it? Because the United States backed them. They provided the air power. There weren't any U.S. servicemen in 72 in Vietnam, but the air power made the difference, and the South Vietnamese managed to fight off the North Vietnamese offensive. 75, the Americans have just washed their hands of it and said, "Hey, you're on your own. We're not providing anything for you. No air power, no more weapons, no ammunition, nothing." And of course, the army just collapsed within this. So I think once any army is told, "Hey, you're on your own, pal," by its patron, it's done. I mean, I think that's what happened in this case. Syria was done. I mean, that's it. If the Russians don't come in, they're done.
I need to finish my thought. Okay. So the Russians said this is what your security needs are that are necessary and are required because of the unsolved problems that George and I have been talking about ever since this all started about 2 weeks ago. But Assad was making overtures to the Gulf monarchs too, and they were saying, you know, you need to moderate your position. The way to move forward, kind of back off a little bit from Iran. The Iranians picked up on this. As a matter of fact, the Revolutionary Guard told Assad what was going on months ago in Idlib, saying, you know, you see what's going on there, okay? So, I mean, there's what I'm trying to...
I know, but I'm not buying any.
Let me please just let me finish my thought, okay? Because I'm actually going to kind of agree with you. The point is that a lot of what happened is Assad's fault himself, okay? Because I don't think he was a very good leader. Was he a tyrant? Well, that's up to you. You know, there are millions of people that say he was. Okay, I'm not going to defend him that way. But it looked like, you know, when the average soldier is paid $7 a month and a general is paid $40 a month, that equals demoralization, okay? I mean, what George and I may have a number of different minor differences from different sources, but the job was left undone. This is what happens when it's left undone.
I agree, but I think you're right. Right now, I think the Iranians have to come up with an explanation because everyone's looking at them and say, "Hey, what happened?" So they have to blame everything on Assad. I don't find it believable that Assad he went to the Gulf monarchs. And the Gulf monarchs said to him, "Oh, yeah, we can arrange things with the Americans, you know." And the Americans, you know, if you distance yourself from Iran, the Americans are going to lift sanctions. Now, Assad may not have been a great leader, but he was not a fool. I mean, he knew, the Americans are not going to lift sanctions, so he wouldn't have bought into that.
Okay, you know, you can make a promise. You keep a promise is a totally different thing. What it appeared, but in the opinion of some people here, is that Assad was trying to do some kind of balancing. That was ridiculous to assume that you could do that in such a weakened state. Okay, all the while, everyone, on a very regular basis, Israel is bombing you. Okay,
right. Well, that's right. That's right. That's another interesting aspect of it because, of course, not only is Israel bombing and bombing and bombing, I think it's bombing today as well. Targets, you know, these weapons systems, you know, and all sorts of things, and you know, chemical weapons, you know. They got
oh, hit that one again.
Yeah. That's right, exactly. But Israel has now seized additional territory, quite a nice chunk of territory, which Netanyahu announced. And said, well, you know, the agreement was signed in 1974. I mean, we signed an agreement in 1974. What agreement? You lying, you know, whatever. I don't want to say the word. You know, you don't stick to any agreements. I mean, you seize the Golan Heights, you know, which was never assigned to you. You seized it, you annex it. And then, oh, well, this the agreement was signed. You know, this disengagement agreement in 1974 is no longer valid because the Syrian army has left. So we had to unilaterally move in and take over this additional territory, you know, for the buffer zone. It's temporary.
Yeah, we burned down your house. You're not there, so we'll take it. Okay. I mean, and what's the clip that's going around with Netanyahu? There's the absurdity is apparent when he says we will protect Israel's borders. Israel has never declared its borders ever. They don't. They officially do not delineate what's theirs and what is outside. They never go there. From the river to the sea, folks. It's in play. In play.
Well, that's exactly
no, because the appetite comes with the eating. I warn everyone. You know, I don't have to be, you know, the Einstein of geopolitics. All I have lived memory of what happened to Libya, what happened to Iraq, what happened to Afghanistan. When all of this is happening all over again, there is a power vacuum when you have multiple factions, of relative equal strength fighting each other. That's when when your enemies are in a circular firing squad, don't interrupt them, and that's exactly what Israel's going to do.
No, but that's it. So now Israel is taking a slice of Syria. It's not going to give it back. I mean, the whole idea, it was just temporary. Temporary. I mean, Israel always does this temporary. Nothing with Israel is ever temporary. They've taken this chunk, and of course we still go back to that map that Netanyahu presented at the UN General Assembly just before. That was in late September 2023, where this is the new Middle East, and there's Israel, and strangely enough, there's no Palestine on that map. That was a very odd. Somehow, hey, wasn't there supposed to be a Palestinian state created there? No, there wasn't. So that, as you said, the borders, Israel has never recognized its borders because Israel has always laid claim to the mandatory Palestine, that territory that the British controlled until the creation of the state of Israel. Israel has always coveted that territory. So West Bank and Gaza are the only parts of that mandatory Palestine that Israel has not taken over. And of course, then Israel took the Golan Heights, which was never part of the mandatory Palestine. So Israel has taken additional territory. So Israel is now this bombing, and the bombing will just continue. They're going to continue because they're going to claim that anything at all might fall into the hands of whoever. They can just make up, whatever, Hezbollah, Iran, whatever. Anyone, Assadists, anyone, they can fall into their hands, so they can just keep bombing.
But none of these factions, the one particularly in control of Damascus, they're not going to strike Israel. They're not going to fight for that land that was just pickpocketed from Syria in the last couple of days. That they'll never attack them. Okay, and as I said yesterday, George, I mean, Israeli media, they're far more honest than Western media. They're very open about how they help this along. I mean, come on, everybody. The day after the truce with Hezbollah, Israel destroys all the border crossings from Lebanon into Syria. Yeah, because you don't want Hezbollah fighters to be able to come into Syria like they did in the last conflict, and you don't want people to get out too. You want to trap everybody, okay? And so massive bombing happened at that same exact moment, and of course. Golani, he knew all of this. I'm sure he made sure his forces weren't near the place. So there was a lot of coordination here. Now, and Erdogan appears to think that he's the mastermind of all of this and that he can control events. He's going to be disappointed within hours.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, who's going to be the master here? Because he has already done his own bombing. They've been bombing the Syrian, the SDF, the Democratic Forces, which are the Kurds. So we're in a situation where the media are telling us, "Oh, this is fantastic. The Syrian people have liberated themselves." So, even as the United States, Israel, and Turkey are all bombing this country. That's a very strange idea of liberation. You've liberated a country that is being bombed by three major military powers, all far more formidable than Syria was. So essentially, Erdogan, his problem is the Kurds. That's all he really cares about. He just wants to deal with the Kurds. The Americans, Biden said this, that the Americans intend to stay. There's no question Americans are going to stay. And of course, Israel, we talked about that. Now, the real question is, well, what happens to those, we've got the Tartus naval base that the Russians have, as well as the air base, the Hemi air base. That's still unclear. I mean, there's some reports, and I don't know how reliable they are, that the Russians are already evacuating these bases. But if they do evacuate, and I don't see how those bases are sustainable. If they do evacuate them, the Americans are going to take them over. I mean, they're just boom, that's it. They're ours. And so that's I think that's going to be the fate. Now, I mean, Erdogan, I think, is probably going to help out the Russians. You know, if they are going to evacuate them, you know, Erdogan will probably chip in. Yeah, I'll help you take them out. But I don't see how the Russians can stick.
Well, I mean,
their bases there.
Early hours on this one here. My gut feeling is eventually that they'll have to leave. But before then, depending on the relative strength of NTS and Golani and all of that, it'd be kind of wise to make nice with the Russians, or at least leave them alone for the time being here. The amount of chaos that we're going to be witnessing, I don't think anybody has any idea of the scale of it. Okay, like I said, the country is broke. What is there to strip away? Okay, I mean, it's not like the Germanic tribes invading Rome. Like, hey, there's a lot of gold here. Okay, there's a lot of silver here. Okay, there's no gold. There's no silver. Okay, so I'm gonna reserve comment on the Russian bases for the time being. But my gut feeling is I don't think they have long.
No, I don't. And I think then the Americans are going to tell them, hey, you want us to help you, you get the Russians out of here. I mean, I think that's it. I'm sure they've already told them that, you know, if you want anything from us, you get the Russians out of here. So I just don't think that there's any future at all there. And I think I'm sure Erdogan isn't particularly happy having Russians there. So I don't think that's really, you know, going to be up for grabs. But I agree with you that this is going to be chaotic. Which is why I think it's going to be just divided up between the United States, Israel, and Turkey. I think they're going to be calling the shots in Syria, and then, you know, they'll allow kind of a Mickey Mouse government to be created.
But that Mickey Mouse government, I think that's a good way of looking at it. It's only been a day or so, so. Will there be it will be NTS? Will be someone else to be able to kind of stabilize power in greater Damascus? Will that be into the advantage of the three would-be, not would-be, they are aggressors? Will they want international diplomatic status? They would, you know, and then having Russia and recognizing them would be something that they would want. It just depends on how things coalesce and you know, who's beaten out and who joins with what group, and what. It's way too early. I think they're just going to leave the Russian bases on the back burner for the time being.
I don't agree. I don't agree with that. I think that's going to.
This depends how chaotic it is, and it depends. Well, eventually there's going to be an alpha dog. Okay, and with the caveat, in the greater Damascus area, like we started out. Syria as a sovereign state has collapsed.
Yeah, I think that in case of Syria is just going to be seized upon by, you know, the Western powers. I mean, there's just not going to be any room at all for Russia there. It was different in the case of Afghanistan, because that there is a kind of historic link between Russia and Afghanistan, and there was kind of up in the air how things were going to go with the Taliban. But in the case of Syria, that's really boom. That's in the British, French, Israeli, American orbit. I mean, they're just not going to. They're going to push the Russians out right away.
Eventually.
But anyway,
we differ on timetable, but we agree on the outcome.
Yeah, no, that's right. So, but you know, in the case of this, you know, when you say this greater Damascus. That's, I think, all that they're going to do. I mean, even I just don't see anywhere any kind of alternative arising from this Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, other than unless you know, Erdogan has somebody else in his pocket that he can just bring up and say, yeah, you know, I'm not too happy with the HTS. I've got my own leader here, because he backs other factions. I mean, there's the whole National Army, so he could come up. Oh yeah, I like this. I like the Syrian National Army guys.
Possession is 9/10 of the law. Okay, that's what I would worry about. I think Erdogan is a fool. I think he's a fool that he thinks he can control this, because he's unleashed. I mean, the Americans and the Israelis must be laughing their heads off right now. Is that, he was the muscle. He bankrolled them and he gave them all this equipment, and they're doing exactly what we want. When we've had enough of the Turks, we'll let them know. That's how I look at it. I think it's a fool's errand on his part, and he's alienated a lot of people, and he's alienated the Russians. That's for sure.
Right.
No, Erdogan, he loves to, piss on everybody and see what the reaction is. Well, okay, when you're doing it with Azerbaijan, okay, the downside is not so great, okay, but the downside now is immense. The Americans are not going to give up the Kurds, George.
The Americans are not going to give up the Kurds. No, that's exactly right.
No way.
Much too useful.
Way too useful, and a real cover, okay. And the specter. See, Erdogan again. He doesn't get the long game. That's how I see it. Is that it's not inconceivable that the idea of a Kurdish state could come back. Okay, and that will be a checkmate to the Turks.
Yeah. No, I agree that.
I mean, with Syria out and. Iraq, it's very unclear how they're going to react to this. They must be shaking in their boots right now, because Syrian forces or whatever militias that crossed into Iraq, the Israelis are going to say, that's fair game. That's fair game. We go after them.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's right. I mean, how the Americans will I think handle this? I think they're going to tell Erdogan, your task is to focus on Central Asia. That's kind of we want you to, you keep talking about all these Turkic people and bringing this whatever Turkic civilization. Focus on that, with Azerbaijan and then further east. Syria, we get to keep Syria. That's between us and the Israelis. We get to keep Syria. It's all part of our a grand strategy in the Middle East. You focus on your links with the Turkish
Erdogan, you get the booby prize. Okay.
Yeah.
No, he's not going to take that. He's not going to take that well. Not at all.
No, he's not going to take that. But
because in his neo-Ottoman mind, that he's just taking back what is his.
Right. Yeah. That's right. But his problem is that the Americans and the British and all the rest of the former imperial powers, they're not going to give him Syria. That's it. They say, hey, this is ours. We get to keep it. You go focus on on your friendship with with Azerbaijan, and of course your task is to hem in Iran. I mean that's it. This is your position. Make life difficult for Iran, and of course make life difficult for Russia. I mean that's still that's the plan they have for Erdogan. Those are your tasks. Syria, that's not. You're out of Syria. So I think that's I
don't want to go in the weeds here, but I just because I don't want to forget, because I tend to. You and I, we did our usual forensic analysis of Trump's long meandering truth, as in tweet,
right,
and then compare it to Joe Biden's. They're supposed to be about Syria, but they both ended up talking about Russia.
Yep,
both of them did.
Yep.
And it shows, I mean, I have a theory, it's my pet theory, that Dr. Sebastian Gorka is writing all of these ridiculous meandering comments. But it shows a confluence of mentality of the outgoing administration and the incoming administration. They're still focused on the same things: Iran, right. Russia.
That's right. That's right. That's the. It was very interesting when when you watch the interview, Lavrov's interview with Tucker Carlson, and he generally didn't say anything that he hadn't said many times before, but he talked about this meeting that he had with Tony Blinken. Tony. our friend Tony Blinken, and Blinken says something like, I don't know, you know, hey, you need to withdraw from Ukraine or whatever, and then Lavrov said, well, you know, you Americans, you're trying to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. And said, no, we're just trying to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia in Ukraine. So it's just only in Ukraine. It's not a global thing. But it was a very interesting that, you know, Blinken said, oh, it's not a global thing. Well, of course it's a global thing. That's exactly what the plan is. And has been and has been. I mean, the point is with Trump, when he brings on all these creatures like Sebastian Gorka and Waltz and the rest of them, they all think that's the same way.
Yeah,
we deal with Russia first, and then we'll deal with China. You know, that's the plan. But it's always it's the same order. And while China and Trump may think about China, he's essentially hemmed in by the people that he's appointed. They say Russia first, then we're going to deal with China.
Well, okay, again, because I don't want to forget, but I think it's 100% certain that shortly Iran will announce that it has a nuclear weapon. I think it has no choice.
I agree. It has no choice. I mean, it has no choice. I mean, I mean, it should have done this a long time ago.
We've been on this over this terrain before. Okay. Yeah.
Right. Because as always, because I mean, if you disarm yourself, then you know your adversaries are going to come after you. And I think that was always the case with Iran. That by making this unilateral commitment, say, well, it's against you know, having nuclear weapons is against Islamic teaching. I mean, you know, it was nuts. And that's why I think, you know, as I said before, I'm not sure Islamic clerics, or indeed clerics at all, are the right people to govern states. I mean, you want sort of cold, ruthless, secular leaders to govern states. They wouldn't make any kind of commitment well, actually some of them did, but you know,
well,
they have made that commitment.
I think some of them certainly have, because, and the argument would be, being obviously not even a novice in these things, is that, well, if we don't protect the revolution, then there is no Islamic Republic. So, I mean, you want to protect the Islamic Republic, or do you want to preserve the revolution? And they'll all, well, ipso facto, I want to protect the revolution. Well, if you want to protect the revolution, you have to protect the regime, okay? And so they have no choice but to do that. And,
they have to. They have no choice. But you know, when you had leaders like Muammar Gaddafi, for you know, and whatever, for whatever reason he decided to forego nuclear weapons, he basically signed his own death warrant. And I say for whatever reason because I saw on YouTube the other day where he was addressing the Arab League, I think in around 2008, and he was very, very perspicacious because he said, you know, look at what they did to Saddam Hussein. They went into Iraq, they invaded Iraq, and they killed Saddam Hussein and said, they're going to do that to you. You know, this was the Arab League. So everyone, you know, and you know, you're next. You know, why did they go into Iraq? Because that's what they do. You know, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. You know, Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. They just went in, invaded the country, and then executed Saddam Hussein. Very, very good, very effective speech that he made to the Arab League. That was in 2008. And then you wonder, well, if you knew that, and I assume you must have known this throughout your life, he was already an old man by then, why did you give up your nuclear program? You know, these are things that I've never understood.
I've never understood either. And given, and maybe this is, you know, Monday morning quarterbacking. I'm not going to put my marker down on analysis that I've heard over the last 36 hours. I'm profiting them because I think they're important for the discussion. But is it now Monday morning quarterbacking? It's all Assad's fault. Yeah, you know, I'm not going to. You know, that's cheap talk.
Exactly.
Who am I to say? And maybe that's part of the narrative for the resistance. I'm gonna keep arm's length from it until I learn a whole lot more, and I want to learn a whole lot more. Okay?
No,
This is an event that, look, George, privately back and forth as these events were unfolding, and with a few other friends like Mark Sloboda, there's a lot of egg on a lot of faces right now. Okay, and I'm not going to, try to hoodwink you and say, I was right all along. No, I was not any more right than anybody else. So,
I think so.
That's why George and I are having this discussion here.
No, I agree, because it's very easy now, essentially, to dump on Assad. I mean, that's the easiest thing to know. Oh yeah, it's all his fault. But that's the same thing again. We've seen this before. I mean, it's the same thing that happened with Ghani in Afghanistan. Oh, it's all his fault. And then of course they did, go way back in South Vietnam with Thieu, and it's it's all his fault. It's all his fault. But ultimately, if you're dependent upon someone else, and if you're small and you're weak, and essentially a great power comes in and saves you, then you become dependent on that great power. I mean, and then ultimately, when it became clear to Assad or the Assad's army that Russia wasn't coming in, Iran wasn't coming in, well, of course, morale collapsed. There was just simply, we don't even have to go into conspiracies about, they were bribed, they were infiltrated and whatever. They basically, hey, that's it. We're done. I mean, there's always some to get people to sacrifice their lives, you need a lot of morale. You need to really juice people up to go in there to do something that's so irrational, which is to sacrifice your own life. And then when you realize this is hopeless, the people we're expecting to save us aren't coming in, then no one's going to sacrifice his life.
One thing is irrefutably true, and maybe it's the point of departure for this discussion. The sanctions worked. Okay, they worked.
Yeah,
they crushed that economy.
Yes,
they
agree.
Crushed it. Okay,
yeah.
Now. Question is, with Gulani in power, the DEI choice of Islamic terrorism, is the West going to lift sanctions? I doubt it. It's too unstable. It's too unstable. Okay. Yeah. No. They're going in. I already called it cadaver. Now that's the dismemberment part of the cadaver. Yes. Okay. That's what this is.
Yeah, no, I agree. They're basically, but what you said was rather very interesting. Is this now the time for the project of creating a Kurdish state? I mean, say, let's create a Kurdish state.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, the Kurdish state, and it's like, well, but Iraq isn't going to like it. Well, who cares about Iraq? Erdogan isn't going to like it. Well, who cares about him? I think this may well be a very good opportunity. Hey, we'll take a slice out of Syria. And then we have our own slice, where we have our military bases, and then Israel can have its slice, and that's it. So I think this could well be that opportunity for creating
the golden age of statehood finally has arrived. because the Kurds historically are I think it's from 5 different countries. Their geography and not having access to the sea. I mean, one of the most screwed people in the world are the. I'm sympathetic to their statehood. Absolutely. Okay. Self-determination, of course. Why not? But unfortunately, the way you're spread out, all of the countries can say no. No, Syria is gone. There's no vote there. Okay. Iraq, I think, is shaking in its boots right now. Iran, this will be just as much against Iran as it would be against the Turks. So why not? So, I mean, I think that I can't think of a better set of circumstances that just almost literally overnight gave them a shot at it. Unlike all of the ridiculous arguments that, under this circumstance, we have to make an exception. And, these are really peace-loving people. None of that was always democracy. All of that was just pablum. Now, geopolitically, makes perfect sense.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. And then they'll just, you slice it up, And then of course they'll be, hey, but what about United Nations? Aren't you supposed to maintain territorial integrity and sovereignty? No, not really. Syria doesn't exist anymore, so we can't talk about territorial integrity and sovereignty anymore. Sorry.
This is a literature that was developed in the 1990s. Actually, we got the term "failed state," and I can remember a program during the Syrian, the dirty proxy war against Syria. All my Israeli guests would say it's already a failed state, so it doesn't, it's not applicable under international law. That is a neocon Zionist argument if there's ever been one.
Well,
okay,
you're right.
It will be applied.
Exactly, but it goes beyond that. It started at the time of Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia had claimed, hey, look, Croatia and Slovenia had seceded from Yugoslavia, and that's illegal under international law. And so they had to, all these international jurists had to come up with some argument. Well, what are we going to say? Because it's obviously true. This is illegal under international law. Oh, not really, because Yugoslavia is a state in dissolution. So it's not really a state in any meaningful sense. And so that's how they said, okay, so therefore we're entitled to recognize Croatia and Slovenia. So you can always, that's when they did it in 1992, when they came up with this nonsensical argument. Oh, well, it's a state in dissolution. We say, okay, Syria doesn't really exist anymore. It's a state in dissolution. So therefore we don't have to recognize any borders or anything like that. We can just do whatever the hell we want.
Well, they will do whatever the hell they want. Okay. I mean, over the last 2 years, the international law is in tatters. I don't even know if I'm even going to refer to it anymore. I mean, it's like chasing windmills right now. I mean, if the most important stakeholders in our geopolitical world don't adhere to it, then why should anybody else? Okay, that's one of the great tragedies of our time. Okay,
yeah.
And George is absolutely right. The literature was spawned as a reaction to rationalizing the senseless destruction of the former Yugoslavia.
That's absolutely right. That's right. Do you want to go on to another topic? Or do you want to continue on Syria?
Well, I mean, is there any questions in the chat that
okay. Let's take a look. Yeah, let's take a look at that. So, because I want to talk a little bit about what's been going on in Romania, and so let me see.
George is itching to talk about Romania because that's what we were supposed to do in my program yesterday, but events proceeded, and so George had to put that back in his folder. But it's really important. The way I had designed the program is that we would talk about Romania, Georgia, and Moldova, because I think, and I don't know, maybe I should keep it. You know what I called the program, George? You'll love this. Regime change buffet. That was the title.
That's right. But let's first of all, let's see what Gagglers, the people who actually keep your dogs happy, by making their contributions. So they're let's see. So DJ, thank you very much. He is always thinking about your dogs, because your dogs are so unreasonable, they're so irrational that they need to be they need the money, and they get to keep all of it. And then so thank you, DJ. And then Stone River, thank you very much for your generosity. So Stone River says, in a nutshell, what drove the US's original Assad must go campaign? So, well, I mean,
Israel, one word.
I think Israel, it was that, but I think also there has been, long-standing objection to the secular Arab leaders. It goes all the way back to the 1950s, and of course then the rise of Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt. where, because basically the British at the time, the British were the most important power, but also the Americans, they were supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt against Nasser. And then, of course, and then again, you had the secular rulers in Iraq and in Syria, the Baathists. They were always the Western powers hated them and wanted to encourage Islam. They always want to encourage Islamism, and that's been the long-standing policy of the West, and of course Israel as well. Israel supported Hamas against the PLO. It was the PLO that the Israelis really hated, long before Hamas, and they were very happy to see Hamas take power in Gaza. So I think that's why Assad had been in the crosshairs for really a long time, and again, I remember how much his father was absolutely hated in the Western media. It was always, he's a terrorist, he's responsible for so many terrorist acts, and it was regularly. And I remember the British, I think, broke off diplomatic relations with him, claiming he was a terrorist and whatever. So that, I think, it's a long-standing tradition of the Western imperial powers to support the Islamists as against the secular leaders.
Assad just said no. Okay, that was enough to get him in so much trouble. Yeah. But I mean, Israel was always very, very close into. Because George and I can remember. I mean, he just mentioned it. I mean, the Israelis, they talk about Iran. Well, when George and I were younger men, it was Assad, Syria, Assad, Syria.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Exactly. It was always Assad, and because when Sadat took over from Nasser and then began this policy of essentially Egypt abandoning the Arab cause, then essentially the leadership of the Arab world really devolved to Assad, and Assad's Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez Assad. He became the kind of the leader of the opposition, the rejectionist front, and the leader of the pro-Palestinian cause. I mean, yes, the Saudis had the money, but the Saudis, they were never really, they never had any kind of any real interest or passion for the Palestinian cause, but Syria did.
They had much more passion for yachts on the Riviera.
Exactly. Yeah, hanging out in casinos in London and Paris. So yeah, absolutely. So that's why they were never the leaders. But Hafez Assad, he really took it over after Egypt's departure, and it was really quite courageous of him, because it seemed at the time, look, once Egypt's gone, there really isn't any pan-Arabic movement at all, because that's it. I mean, Egypt was obviously the major power in the Arab world, and Sadat just simply upped and left. And so it was the fact that it survived, I think, was due to Syria.
Yeah, I mean, in the larger picture, I'm glad George mentioned this, because there's again, I want to be fair, okay? I want to embellish here, but if you look at it over a wide expanse of history, the resistance gets maybe more potent, sometimes more rhetorical, but I mean, this is a pattern. I mean, bing, 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 taking everybody off the table.
Yep.
That's why Trump and Biden to talk about Russia and Iran. They don't talk about Ukraine and Syria.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. And Trump, in that interview with on Meet the Press with Kristen Walker, which was aired on Sunday, he was saying, "Oh, and I think you're going to ready to apply any pressure on Netanyahu." Yes, I think it was. I think it was more like. Are you really going to apply pressure to get peace in Gaza? And he said, yeah, but we're going to win this war first. And so basically, he's telling Netanyahu, yeah, go ahead, get the job done, whatever that job is, and then we can talk about peace in Gaza, whatever that means.
I have to wonder before the inauguration if Israel is going to, at the very least, annex northern Gaza, just annex it, okay? And the U.S. will recognize it, okay? And then they'll have to work on a ceasefire or some peace, which means the war will continue. But Trump will be able to say, well, just by my force of nature, we have that part of the conflict resolved, which, is not resolving it. I'm looking for a gimmick, George, on this before inauguration.
Yeah, I could well be. I mean, given what Biden said, Biden's taking victory laps for Israel's victories, and of course Netanyahu's giving victory laps for Israel's victories. Hey, yeah, look what it's because we were so successful and we were so ruthless. Iran is a shadow of what it was. Hezbollah's done. Assad is gone. Russia is on the brink of getting pushed out of Syria. Hey, it's all because of me. All because of me. Netanyahu said, I did it. And then Biden says, yeah, because, all this assistance that we provided for Israel, we have all these great victories for Israel. So why not take the next step? Hey, well, if we won, we should take the spoils of victory. I mean, that's what you do when you win. You take the spoils.
Everyone, George and I think we're a party of two of naysayers, but Netanyahu is far from done. Okay, far from done. Okay, he gets to be the point of just being nerdy. These corruption. Israel is a very corrupt place. Everyone. Okay, so. He's up in the polls. He's up in the polls. Okay. Thanks to Joe Biden. Okay. I mean, when you think about it, the unceasing bombing of Gaza, the Lebanon was just trashed. Okay. And now they're doing it to Syria. I mean, where do these bombs come from? They don't grow them on trees.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly. And Netanyahu said, hey, yeah, I was the one. I had the guts to do all this thing. You thought, hey, we can't go around assassinating Hamas leaders. We can't do anything like sending these pages, which are really dangerous. I mean, who the hell knows where these pages are going to explode? We did it, and look what we did to Hezbollah's leaders. Hey, you can't go around assassinating Hassan Nasrallah, a man of his stature. We did it. And so he's going to say, yeah, I did it. I was ruthless enough to do it. And the Israeli public thinks, yeah, he was the one who had the guts to do it. He was told, don't go into Rafah. I will go into Rafah. Don't do it. I will do it. And he went in and did it. And by going into Rafah, then they were able to kill, the Hamas leaders. So he's right. All the talk when it was months and months ago. Netanyahu is in a lot of trouble. The courts are gonna come after him. The public wants him gone. No, the public doesn't want him gone. The public was very, very happy with what he has done, and they're happy with his thing. And the courts, he can always just fight off the courts. I mean, that whole thing that he's going to go to prison. He's not going to prison. I can be absolutely sure he isn't going to prison.
And looking at some of the comments here, at least on StreamYard, it's really, really heartbreaking for me is that people that are claim to be pro-Palestine and are joyful to seeing the end of Assad. I really think you need to be a little bit more intellectually sophisticated about that. Yep. Okay, it's been, for me, it's just really heartbreaking. Because Kevork that we had on a few days ago, brilliant guy, really brilliant. Yeah. As a result of what's happened in Syria, the fate of the Palestinian people, it's essentially sealed. Okay, not in a good way. All right. And because again, you need a few more years, like George and I have. This mantra about Assad all our life. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And there's a residue of that, as if somehow now everything is going to be better. No, it's going to get a lot worse.
No, I absolutely agree.
I have never once ever sung the praises of Bashar al-Assad. Never once. Okay. My baseline, it is what it is.
No, the thing was with Assad was, he again, we have to do the consistency with his father, which is Syria was a force for stability in the Middle East. He intervened in Lebanon in 1976 under the auspices of the Arab League, Romanian, but he intervened in Lebanon in order to bring some kind of a stability there, just to end the civil war. And he did it. I mean, it's to a great extent. Now, of course, Israel then, did the catastrophic thing of invading Lebanon while there was a civil war there. But he was throughout a force for stability in the Middle East. What you have now is the very opposite of any kind of stability. And of course, again, because he was a force for stability, the great powers moved in to destroy him. And now he's talking about this, who's really a friend of the Palestinians? Well, Erdogan, the big Muslim, the leader of the Muslim world, he's the Sultan of the Muslim world. Well, he's not doing, he hasn't done anything for the Palestinians. He's providing oil, making sure that Israel gets oil from Azerbaijan. So Israel's war machine gets oil. Erdogan secured that. So all the things that Erdogan's been doing to Syria, he hasn't, he never did any of that for the Palestinians. And then you talk about the sophistication. Al Jazeera, which hates Assad, again, hey, Assad's one of the few leaders, there aren't too many, who's actually been a supporter of the cause of the Palestinians. And Al Jazeera hates the Russians. And maybe the Russians didn't do that much of the Palestinians, but at least it's a voice. It's an international voice on behalf of the Palestinians, and you hate them. You denounce the Russians all the time.
Oh, and they hate Iran also. Okay.
Exactly.
I think I've said this before, and I probably will stop doing it now. But ever since October 7th, I would watch at least one news hour a day of Al Jazeera because I thought their coverage of Gaza was really quite superb. But when a couple of weeks ago, when this started percolating, you could see, the schizophrenia. And I wonder if any of them actually think about it. But it's just absolutely pure propaganda right now. It's just layer after layer. It's really nauseous coverage.
Right. Yep. No, that's right. Anyways,
we're over a little bit an hour. Do you want to take a few more questions? Yeah.
I've got a few more. Exactly. I want to, because Stone River says Trump, quote, destroyed, unquote, ISIS. Now their kindred spirits have taken over a whole country. How will Trump spin this one? Well, that's what Trump does. Trump has very little real attachment to reality. I mean, he's just simply always, immersed in his own rhetoric, and so he'll go on insisting that he destroyed ISIS. And he says, I killed al-Baghdadi, I destroyed ISIS. And then if you were to say to him, well, what about the 75 bombing missions that the United States launched yesterday against ISIS? He'll just say, well, I destroyed it. I mean, then, it's just sprung up again.
Biden dropped the ball. Biden dropped the ball, okay?
Exactly, Biden dropped the ball. I mean, that Trump always has an explanation, or at least an attempt at an explanation.
ISIS was put at bay by the Russians, not by Trump, over 6 weeks, and they had 25 planes. And they bombing runs night and day. And then Trump said that he did it. I don't care who takes credit for it. I was just glad it was done, okay? And then the Americans illegally occupied part of Syria, the most important part, other than Aleppo, which was the industrial part, and then gave haven and comfort to
ISIS. Yeah, ISIS. Exactly. Yeah. And then Stone River goes on. Thank you, Stone River. Thank you for your generosity. It says, has any evidence of Assad's dictatorial brutality ever been produced? Where is it? Well, this is one of the things that, you have the Human Rights Brigade that always then comes along with this evidence of brutality. But it's always a very one-sided, because what they do is they go and interview Assad's opponents. you know, all the people who have a beef with Assad, and they would tell all kinds of horror stories about, oh yeah, you know, well, you know, the terrible tortures that took place in prison, and then they publish that and say this is the most horrible, savage dictatorship that there has ever been. But the fact is that Assad released all the sort of the prisoners, these jihadis from prison at the behest of the Americans. At the time when he was making nice with the Americans during the war on terror, he released them, and of course they turned on him. So the evidence is, you always have to take it with a large grain of salt, because the people who are presenting the evidence are all intense opponents of Assad.
Look, particularly during the proxy war, let's be honest here. You're in a state of war. There is a number of great powers are trying to destroy you, and you have a fifth column in your country. What do you do, George?
Right.
You crack down.
Yeah.
You crack down. Does that mean I support torture? Of course not. Was it brutal for some people? Many people? Probably. Okay. But I mean, you have to contextualize it. Again, George and I uniformly agree with the proposition. What they have now is better than what they had before.
Well,
okay.
Exactly.
It's good. It's going to play out. I'm going to stay with my position. Okay. If you were a dissident in Assad's Syria, you probably weren't in a good place. But now, if you're a Shia, if you're Alawite, you're Christian, and many others, you're going to be in deeper trouble. At least
this is really the right. Okay, but this is really the point. When we say about somebody torture, then you say, all right, well, how would the United States have responded in the face of any kind of an insurgency? Would almost certainly with far greater ruthlessness and cruelty than Syria did. You know, this is what the Americans are always very good at doing. You know, they suddenly start screaming, oh my God, torture, brutality and whatever. But what do you do when you're waging these global wars on terror? Hey, you set up, these whole an archipelago of torture centers. That's how you dealt with when you dealt with terrorism, and you have the nerve to denounce Assad or how he dealt with terrorists. I mean, it's they always have this so outrageous a read on things, and that's that. And what was it Obama said? We tortured some folks. Okay, that's it. That's a nice, cute thing to say. We tortured some folks. And then, of course, he immediately made sure that no one would be prosecuted for torturing some folks. So I said, well, no impunity. We don't believe in impunity for crimes. Yes, but impunity for us, but not for you.
Anyway, okay, George, 10 more minutes. I got to wrap this up. I got to get ready for tomorrow.
Okay. All right. So then, okay. Well, let's then read the. Okay, I'll read some of the more some of the comments, and then you can go, and then I'll just want to talk about Romania.
Okay.
So, anyways, Dan Rock says the reason Syria was economically ruined and soldiers were paying peanuts was mostly to do with sanctions. Let's not forget. Agreed. And then and so again, then he says any brutality Assad could have committed would be insignificant to the brutality that's coming, and anything Israel does. These Arab countries are so subservient to Israel and the U.S. that next they'll invite Israel to the Arab League. Yeah, that's not too not too far-fetched.
Honorary Arab, okay.
Right. The Western reaction to a horde of head-chopping terrorists taking over a secular, diverse country is the umpteenth example of the degenerate spiral. Yeah, no, I think that's that's quite correct. So yeah, then let's go back.
Some really good comments.
Very, very, very good comments. Okay, so you need to go now, Peter?
Need to go. Thank you, everybody. This was a lot of fun. I participated greatly during the day. I'm really glad I can talk to George about this because all during the day, like myself, George, is absorbing what's being said all around us. And the propaganda machine is just in overdrive right now. So if you, I mean, the American coverage is inane. It's not contextualized. It's the good guys won, the bad guys vanquished. There's no history. There's no geopolitics. It's just all personalized. And then, oh, by the way, and this person was in prison for 10 years, and he did, and then he just goes to that. Okay. We have to do better. We have to do a lot better, because like George and I agreed yesterday, we're going to talk about the horrors of what's going to come for a while.
That's right.
All right, everybody, got to run it.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about Romania. So, okay, thank you, Peter.
All right, take care, guys.
Okay, so I just want to then talk here about the ruling by the Constitutional Court in Romania. Again, let's remember that there was an election that was supposed to take place on. Do I have this? Yeah. So it was supposed to take place on Sunday, and the candidate, the kind of a populist nationalist figure, was going to win, and therefore the powers that be, the political establishment in Romania, the political establishment in Europe, didn't really know what to do, because look, Romania is a strategically important state, and there was nothing they can do about this. He was so far ahead in the polls, so they had to really come up with some story to either disqualify this candidate Georgescu, or to claim that Russia something untoward had happened, which legitimized the cancellation of the election. So the Romanian Constitutional Court said, we're just going to cancel not just the second round of the voting, because there'd been a first round in which Georgescu had won and was now very comfortably ahead of his opponent, but we're just going to cancel the entire election. The whole election, round one and round two, is going to have to be run again. We don't know when, maybe sometime in the spring, maybe in the summer, who knows, but we can't go ahead with this election. And that's a really quite extraordinary for the West, because we know in previously, when we had the referenda that went in a way that the political establishment didn't like, then you basically say, okay, well, we're just going to do it again. We're going to rerun this election again. And remember, Ireland twice. I mean, it rejected by referendum the Nice Treaty. It rejected the Lisbon Treaty, and they had to just keep rerunning the election. France did the same thing. France rejected by a referendum the European Union Constitution. So that basically, we just ignore what the French voters said. But they've never really canceled an election. I mean, that's unique, and that's what they did this time, which is just outright cancellation of the election. And not only was it cancellation in the last minute, but it was a cancellation when the voting had already started. In other words, the Romanian diaspora had already started voting in the second round. And so that was when they decided to cancel. So let me first see if I can show the interview that this Georgescu gave to Sky News. This is this man that they needed to stop. So let's take a look.
So I want to ask you very clearly, did you know about this malign activity? Do you have any links to Russia?
Doesn't exist any relationship with any foreign part or particular with Russia, as they said. Doesn't exist from my side. My only relationship with the Romanian people. So the Constitutional Court of Romania, I want to be very clear from now, is a mafia court of Romania. Because they cannot accept, and nine people, because the court is a function of 9 people. 9 people decide for 19 million of people. This is not accept. This doesn't mean coup d'etat made by the state, which is installed right now in power in Romania.
If a foreign state had tried to influence this election, would you condemn that?
Absolutely, totally.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but are you saying that one of the reasons the Romanian state stopped you was because they were under pressure to prevent a peace deal in Ukraine?
Yes, for sure. They need war and they need to protect their chairs. It's a dictator.
Is this just Romania you're accusing, or a wider NATO, EU?
Look, the pressure from international is huge on that. NATO become from a defense organization an offensive organization, and this cannot be accepted.
Is your suggestion that Russia should keep the territory that it has already seized in Ukraine?
For me, I don't care what they are dealing. For me, it's important to stop the war. It's not my business what is between them, to be very clear.
I just want to be clear. You're saying that some European leaders and NATO officials came together to put pressure on the Romanian establishment to stop your campaign because they don't want peace.
Exactly. They need war. And they are looking only for war.
So
the politicians...
Are you convinced that you're going to win tomorrow?
Totally convinced. And for this reason they attack. Because already when the people from abroad, Romanian people, of course, they are starting for voting. And they're starting already, by the way, in the morning of Friday, which does mean yesterday, today is Saturday. Already in the first 4 or 5 hours, I had 80%, more than 80%. And they know in the real time that on Sunday, probably the success will be clarified with more than 80% as percentage.
If you're right and the state is against you, do you expect the police to turn up and put you in prison?
I don't care, because I said very clear, my life is not important in front of the eternity.
So you can see here that this was a real problem for NATO. I mean, here is saying clearly NATO is not a defensive organization. NATO is an offensive organization. So this was the person who was destined to win an election decisively on Sunday. And as we've discussed before, the United States is building its biggest military base in Europe in Romania. It's not going to be at Ramstein in Germany anymore. It's going to be in Romania. Romania is absolute strategic location. It's on the Black Sea coast. It's next door to Ukraine. It's going to be an arms hub of transferring weapons to Ukraine to fight Russia. They can't just allow Romania to slip away in this way. So, it was clear when he won that first round that they were going to make sure that it's not going to happen again. And what was really important was that, first of all, they have to cancel the whole thing. Because if they just simply postpone the election, then he's going to win anyway. I mean, he's so far ahead of the polls, he's going to win. So they had to cancel the entire election. The whole thing has to be played from start to finish. But they've also launched a criminal investigation of Georgescu. And that's the important thing, because the criminal investigation, phony baloney criminal investigation, will ensure that they can keep him off the ballot when they do rerun the election. And that's the most important thing, because if they just have another election in March, April, May, he's going to win. So they had to then come up with some sort of an explanation as to why did you cancel an election. That's a very dramatic thing to do. Imagine if it was anyone else. Imagine one of America's adversaries had decided to cancel an election at the very last minute. They would be screaming. The State Department would immediately announce sanctions against the state that canceled an election that he was likely to lose. But now, instead, the US State Department is congratulating the Romanians for canceling an election in the name of democracy. You're acting in the name of democracy when you cancel an election. So let's take a look. I'll show you how the US government has played this. Here we have, I think this is, yes, so this is on December the 6th. This is a statement from Matthew Miller of the US State Department. And so he says, the United States stands with the Romanian people as they face an unprecedented situation regarding the integrity of their elections. Romanians must have confidence that their elections reflect the democratic will of the Romanian people. And if you're not confident it's a democratic will, then you cancel the election and are free of foreign malign influence aimed at undermining the fairness of their elections. The integrity of Romania's elections is paramount for Romanians' hard-earned democracy. It is the choice of the Romanian people whom they elect, except that they can't elect him. You're free to elect whomever you want, and you can't elect Georgescu or anyone else who calls NATO into question. No other country or foreign actor has that right. And then we note that the Romanian Constitutional Court's decision today with respect to Romania's presidential elections, the United States reaffirms our confidence in Romania's democratic institutions and processes, including investigations into foreign malign influence. We call on all parties to uphold Romania's constitutional order and engage in a peaceful democratic process free from the threats of violence and intimidation, which reflects the Romanian people's democratic will. Now, Romanian people's democratic will would find expression in the victory of Georgescu. He was ahead, very comfortable in the polls. He was destined to win. So therefore, in the name of democracy, you cancel an election. I mean, you have to do that. I mean, otherwise it will be an undemocratic outcome. Now, they've been talking about this foreign malign influence, but of course they haven't come up with any evidence of this foreign malign influence. That's why they're saying investigation. They have to keep investigating until you come up with something that you can call a foreign malign influence. And while they're suggesting that Russia, of course, was involved, they still don't have any evidence that Russia was involved. And of course, involved in what way? And this is where he comes with something that this TikTok campaign on behalf of Georgescu. But of course, even if there is a campaign on TikTok, and even if Russia had been involved in this campaign on TikTok on behalf of Georgescu, that still doesn't explain why people voted for him. I mean, let's say, well, they're so stupid in Romania that a campaign on TikTok, they find persuasive. But that's the point. And this is what happened, of course, in the United States in 2016. They talked about the social media, that somehow Russians were involved in the social media campaign on behalf of Trump. Which, even if it were true, and they never really come up with any evidence, but even if it were true, that still doesn't explain why people voted for him. Anyway, then we have Blinken. Antony Blinken also weighs in, and Blinken says, in Moldova, the OSCE affirmed a well-administered runoff despite Russian interference. So we've already just talked about Moldova was a theft in plain sight. I mean, they disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of Moldovans who were living in Russia who couldn't vote because they only had 2 polling stations open in Moscow, and they only had 5,000 ballot papers in each of the polling stations. So, 500,000 Moldovans in Russia, tough luck, you can't vote. And yet he has the nerve, Blinken has the nerve here to say, well, it was a well-administered runoff. I mean, the lying is just off the charts. And then he says, and now Romanian authorities are uncovering a Russian effort, large in scale and well-funded, to influence the recent presidential election, contrary to OSCE standards. As I say, they haven't uncovered anything. I mean, that order from the Romania's constitutional court was really thin. It was just like 1 page, and that was it. And then, meanwhile, in Georgia, observers shed a light on troubling reports of voter intimidation and efforts by the ruling party to tilt the playing field in its favor, which is very strange because the election has already taken place. It's over. Why is he talking in the present tense? Unless, of course, they're planning to rerun the election because, again, the Georgians, like the Romanians, they voted the wrong way. So you have to cancel that election. Anyway, it says the United States shares the concerns of many OSCE members about Georgian Dream's decision to suspend EU accession process. This has eerie overtones of 2014. And that, of course, means, yes, when we overthrew the government of Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine, and here he's issuing this threat when he says this has eerie overtones of 2014. Well, what does he mean by that? What kind of eerie overtones other than, you see what we did to Yanukovych, Mr. Georgian Dream, we can do the same to you. Eerie overtones. Anyway, and then we have again, this was earlier, the Romanian presidential election by Matthew Miller, and so again, he's just complaining, so on and so on. And then again, United States values Romania's contribution as a strong NATO ally and a partner in the European Union. Romania's hard-earned progress, anchoring itself in the transatlantic community, cannot be turned back by foreign actors seeking to shift Romania's foreign policy away from its Western alliance. Cannot be turned back. Notice the threatening tone. This is the United States warning Romanians, you cannot vote the way you want it. Cannot be turned back by foreign actors. And of course, this kind of reminds one, those of us of an older generation, of Brezhnev's famous the Brezhnev Doctrine, which he invoked after the Warsaw Pact intervention in Czechoslovakia in 1968, that you cannot go back on your socialist commitments. Once you've turned the corner into socialism, you cannot go back. That was the reason for the intervention by the Warsaw Pact. And that's what Matthew Miller says. It cannot be turned back. You are now only in this transatlantic community. And then he says, any such change would have serious negative impacts on U.S. security cooperation with Romania. And while a decision to restrict foreign investment would discourage U.S. companies from continuing to invest in Romania. Very, very threatening tone. And then here we have actually, surprisingly, a quite interesting article in the Financial Times. The headline is, of course, is a tell, because it says Romania tries to suppress a far-right surge. Calin Georgescu appeared set to win the presidential election until the nation's high court annulled the first round result. At least it's honest. He appeared set to win the presidential election until the nation's high court annulled the first round result. It's not true. It didn't annul the first round result. It annulled the election entirely, because by suggesting it was just the first round, that would mean, hey, we're just going to rerun the second round. No, they canceled the whole thing. And then he says, and this is where it's quite interesting, because the media had been saying that Georgescu came out of nowhere. No one had ever heard of him, which makes it all very suspicious that the Russians just created this fake candidate. They just invented him out of whole cloth, and suddenly he was winning an election. That's how the media have played this, that he was just a complete unknown. But here, the Financial Times is honest and says, no, actually, Georgescu is quite a well-known figure. And then it says, it came as no surprise to me that Georgescu has risen to prominence, or that the nationalist right is gaining strength in Romania. For many years, political and economic conditions in Romania have been ripe for this sort of breakthrough. Blaming it on Russian interference and the support that Georgescu generated through social media platform TikTok, factors cited by the court on the basis of declassified intelligence report, is to miss the larger point. I mean, even the media, this was just so blatant and so crude, the cancellation of the election, which the U.S. State Department was that were happy, but even the Financial Times says, look, you can't just cancel an election and scream Russian interference. I mean, you're a laughing stock when you do that. And then here it says, in 2021, Georgescu launched the Homeland Movement, whose goals included the promotion and support of small producers, peasant farming, arts, crafts, family, faith. And then secondly, the rise of the hard right across Western, Central, and Eastern Europe, coupled with Romania's present difficulties, have made mainstream parties vulnerable to insurgent campaigns from extremists and unconventional candidates. Unconventional. And then finally, we need to grasp the enduring strength of Romania's ultra-nationalist political tradition. It stretches back to the pre-Second World War era, revived before the fall of communism in 1989, gained momentum thereafter, and continues to resonate today. And then, yes, Georgescu, like other European right-wing nationalists, is in that he admires Russia's authoritarian system, its emphasis on patriotic values, and its espousal of an extreme anti-Western cultural conservatism. And then, in other respects, Romanian nationalism is at odds with Russia. Yeah, I mean, Romanians, there's no love lost between Romanians and Russians. This is especially true with regard to the ambition of uniting Romania with Moldova, something that Russia stands in the way of. And then it also applies to the favorable light in which Georgescu and other ultra-nationalists hold Ion Antonescu, Romania's dictator during the Second World War. An informal partial rehabilitation of Antonescu took place in the 1990s. For that reason, he was seen as an anti-Russian patriot. Well, yeah, because Romania, under Antonescu, had invaded the Soviet Union in 1941 as part of the Axis powers, led by Nazi Germany, obviously, who took part in Operation Barbarossa. Romania did this under Antonescu, as did Hungary. So that's why it's always very peculiar when they say these things. Oh, it's very, very pro-Russian. Yeah, but Romanians and the Hungarians, they were at Stalingrad and they were fighting on the other side. They were fighting against the Russians at Stalingrad. So there's kind of a limit to how you can combine Romanian ultra-nationalism with pro-Russian sentiments. And then here we have, they quote this Cristian Pirvulescu, professor of political science. He gets it right. My impression is that Georgescu himself is not pro-Russia. His supporters are nationalists, not pro-Russian, but also not pro-Ukrainian. Yeah, that's it. He's a nationalist. He's like Orban, who's also not pro-Russian. Orban is a kind of a Hungary first person. And Georgescu, I think, was saying, and we saw a little bit of that in the interview, he's Romania first, much like Georgian Dream is Georgia first. Basically, Ukraine is not my problem. My people are my problem. And then the modern Romanian far right emerged in 1927 with the creation of Corneliu Zilea Codreanu, of the ultra-nationalist Legion of the Archangel Michael, and then the Iron Guard, the Legion's military wing, soon became the name applied to Codreanu's group. Of course, the Iron Guard they ruled in Romania, and then they talk about this the three central elements of the Codreanu's program: anti-Semitism, a distorted version of Orthodox Christianity, and the cult of the peasant as the embodiment of natural unspoiled man, which is quite interesting. But what has it got to do with Russia and Ukraine? Nothing, obviously. And then again, the appeal to peasant values and orthodoxy is visible today in the ideas of Georgescu and the ultra-nationalist right. And then Georgescu's campaign slogan, food, water, and energy, underline how carefully he targeted his campaign at hard-pressed rural Romanian voters. Yeah, that's what he was about. So, everything else, that they're talking about, Ukraine, NATO, and whatever, he was campaigning for hard-pressed rural Romanian voters. And they voted for him. There's nothing to do with TikTok. They have no idea what about TikTok. And then, anyway, this goes on here. Yeah, all right. This is just about the history of Romanian ultranationalism. And then this author says, it strikes me as significant that despite the intelligence reports about Russian interference, not all Romanians' mainstream politicians regard Georgescu as a danger to the country's place in NATO and the EU. And then Victor Ponta, a former prime minister, says Romania will not leave NATO or the EU with or without Georgescu. But it doesn't really matter because they can't tolerate anyone who deviates from the program. And then in Romania, it's not good enough to blame Georgescu's success on TikTok, even though it was the vehicle that propelled him to victory. And then they quote these authors who provide a perceptive appraisal of the Georgescu phenomenon. TikTok can explain just the delivery of his nationalist and isolationist message, but not its resonance. For that, one must consider global trends in anti-system voting and the specific frustrations of contemporary Romanians. Again, some sense coming to this, the usual hysteria about Russians and Russian interference and TikTok and social media. Just say, yeah, this has nothing to do with anything. There are real issues in Romania. And then here's this article in this Robert Schuman Foundation. And this, again, is quite an interesting article. The author is Corinne Deloy. And this was really just after the first round of voting. So it was before the Romanian Constitutional Court's decision. And so she says, she quotes, Georgescu, tonight the Romanian people have cried out for peace. And they have shouted very loudly, extremely loudly. And then it goes, which says, extraordinary awakening of the Romanian people. The economic uncertainty that has weighed on the people for 35 years has become an uncertainty for the political parties. And then she says, which is really quite interesting, she says, despite being relatively unknown to the general public, Calin Georgescu has been involved in politics for many years. He has worked in various ministries, and his name has even been put forward several times for the post of prime minister. In other words, again, media lies that that nobody had ever heard of him. No, he's a very well-known figure in Romania. The ideas that he espouses have a lot of resonance in Romania. It's a long-standing tradition. Again, contrary to the abysmal reporting that you get in Politico, the New York Times, and so on. And then he says, a professor at the University of Pitești, not far from Bucharest, Calin Georgescu is an expert in the environment and sustainable development. He represented Romania on the National Committee of the United Nations Environment Program between 1999 and 2012. He stood in the presidential election as an independent candidate and conducted most of his election campaign on TikTok, calling on his compatriots to save the Romanian nation and stop aid to Ukraine. And then in recent years, Georgescu has caused controversies by describing Ion Antonescu, the man most responsible for the Holocaust in Romania, as a hero of the nation. And again, not something that's going to endear him very much to Russians. He describes the world as manipulated by international lobbies and has made a name for himself by describing the COVID-19 pandemic as an invention by politicians to subjugate the people. And then, presenting himself as an anti-system candidate, he undeniably benefited from the weariness and discontent expressed by Romanians towards the traditional political parties. Anyway, so you get the sense here that we were sold a bill of goods, and now this election is gone, and he's under investigation, and I'm sure that they will find something to prevent him from running in the election whenever, if they hold it, and that's democracy in NATO land. Again, there's a lot of, we saw this in many elections in Europe. We of course saw this in Ukraine. Again, let's remember, in Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych had won the election in 2010, and he was overthrown less than 4 years later by foreign interference. And this is, when you get the outcome that you don't want, then you have to, the foreign powers have to step in. It's just that in Romania, they did it in a very crude way that really, it was very, very hard to justify. So, but fundamentally, as I said, they did this in Ireland, they did this in Denmark, they did this in France. They've tried ferociously. They've imposed sanctions in Georgia, but yet you can't vote. Once you've been sucked into the transatlantic community, you can't vote yourself out of it. And so, that's Romania then just get clubbed. You just cancel it. Just outright cancel it. Anyway, let's see. This is in the there was a chat that I wanted to address. Yeah, Fahad 76. Thank you so much for your generosity. And here you're saying Syria turmoil is mostly on Putin because he had an opportunity to crush HTS in Idlib in 2017 to 2018 when Erdogan went to the UN and then Putin agreed to a ceasefire. I hope he learns his lessons, which I don't think he did. And then I couldn't agree more. I absolutely couldn't agree more, because that was then. I mean, you can't just simply bask in your glories and sit on your laurels. This is politics is a blood sport. You get a temporary victory. That's when you essentially make that victory count. Russia, by stepping in Syria in 2015, and Putin did this in a very dramatic way. He went to the UN General Assembly, announced what he was going to do, and the very next day, the Russian jets were flying over Syria and hitting the Al-Qaeda fighters. But that's the moment that you make your presence significant, and that Russia signally failed to do, and was therefore asking for trouble. All the various. It didn't crush the terrorists. The terrorists were just picked up and transported by bus to Idlib, and so they all went to Idlib, and then you have to say, well, what are you going to do about this? I mean, the only thing that would make sense is that you put them all into Idlib, and then you hit Idlib. You attack Idlib. You bomb. You destroy everyone who's in Idlib. But Putin didn't do that, so he allowed this terrorist statelet to flourish under Idlib. He knew perfectly well that this terrorist statelet was funded, underwritten by his good friend Erdogan. And as you say, in 2018, he went ahead. Syria and Russia together threatened to mount an offensive against Idlib, which is what they should have done. And instead, Erdogan, he went to the United Nations and pleaded that oh my God, there are all these babies. The Russians and the Syrians are going to kill all these babies. And then the representative of the UK at the Security Council, the babies, and then Trump threatened to start attacking Russians, to bomb Russians if they tried to take Idlib. And then you could have said, okay, well, let Trump do it. Let him take the risk. If he wants to do that, let him start, and explain himself as to why he's attacking Russians and supporting essentially the Al-Qaeda terrorists in Idlib. But instead of that, Russia worked out some kind of a deal with Erdogan, knowing full well that Erdogan was never going to fulfill his part of the bargain. That whole issue of Astana, that he was going to separate the moderate terrorists from the extremist terrorists, that was completely bogus. And then of course, this friendship with Erdogan continued to flourish. Russia providing him with S-400 air defense system, something Russia did not provide and has not provided to Iran. So Turkey has the S-400 air defense system, courtesy of Russia. Now, that job was never done. And then you have to say, well, if that wasn't finished, and Erdogan, he's building up his forces in Idlib, and the jihadis, they're armed and well fed, they will move in at some point. They're going to attack Assad. There's no question. They're going to do it. I mean, they're not just sitting there, playing Scrabble. They're preparing to mount another offensive. So that's why, as I was saying earlier, the idea of blaming Assad for this, Russia took this war over and essentially prevented Assad from consolidating his power and actually allowing Assad to take over the country. Instead, Turkey got its slice of Idlib, the northeastern border region in Syria, and then of course you had the Americans. They had their bases. So that's what happens when you don't deliver on your victory. And this is what's happened in Ukraine. I mean, again, Russia had plenty of opportunities to wrap it up. Then it became much more difficult when you don't address the problem at the right time. Then it becomes very difficult, and ultimately, the Assad government became just meaningless because all the players in Syria were not Syrians and were not under the jurisdiction of Bashar al-Assad. And you were absolutely right. That was the time to make the Russian presence felt in Syria. Russia was not preoccupied with Ukraine then in 2017, 2018, 2019. There was no real excuses for not making Russian forces felt. And so that's where we got to. And then Fahad, you say, get rid of the Iranian president. He's weak. Yeah, I agree with you. He's a very weak, ineffectual. And again, these attempts to blame Assad and spinning the story that Assad was planning to remove Iranian influence from Syria, and that's why Iran didn't didn't do anything for him, because somehow Assad had made overtures to the Gulf states, and the Gulf states had promised him that if he eliminated the Iranian presence, the Americans would lift sanctions, and that Assad took this seriously. It's complete nonsense. I mean, Iran is essentially trying to provide excuses as to why he didn't do anything to help him. You know, oh, it's all his fault. He was planning to push us out. No, Assad may not have been a great leader. He wasn't a fool. And he knew perfectly well that the Americans are not going to lift sanctions. The Americans are not going to do anything for him. The Americans only have one idea, and that's to get rid of him. So this is just their excuse as to why they didn't do anything to help him. Oh, yeah, it's all his fault. It's just like the Russians are also presenting it. Oh, yeah, it's all his fault. You know, he didn't carry out whatever kind of reforms. So if he really needed to carry out reforms, well, why didn't Russia make sure that he carried out reforms? He's completely dependent on the Russians. So why didn't they make sure he carried them out? So it's very, very easy now to keep coming along and saying, oh, we didn't do that. We have to adhere to some UN Security Council resolution. Well, that UN Security Council resolution was from 2015. That's 10 years ago. So why haven't you insisted that, if it's so important to you, this UN Security Council resolution, why didn't you insist over the past 10 years that he fulfill this? So this is just their attempt to assign blame to Bashar al-Assad. And again, you know, Assad, he was obviously not an effective leader. He was a rather weak leader, but he was dependent on others, and therefore he was dependent on the military support from others. Once that military support wasn't forthcoming, he went to Moscow in late November because he knew that essentially this was coming. He went to Moscow in late November, and Putin said, "We're not going to do anything for you because we're completely tied up in Ukraine." And once the military realized that the Russians weren't going to come through, and probably the Iranians also realized Russia wasn't going to come through, then they basically said, well, that's it. I mean, we're out of here. They knew they had no hope of prevailing, and that was that. And so it's very easy now to blame Assad, but essentially he went there. He went in late November and said, well, can you provide assistance? And the Russians said no. So anyway, and then Fahad goes on, says, to govern a country like Russia, you need a killer instinct like Stalin, so you don't become prey. Putin is a paper tiger, weak and soft. I mean, we'll see whether Putin is a paper tiger, weak and soft. But I absolutely agree with you. You need somebody like Stalin, and Stalin, who was actually quite ruthless in pursuing the interests of his people. And he did that consistently. He when he was signing his agreements with Nazi Germany, which so outraged kind of liberal or socialist or leftish opinion from 1939 and 1940, he did it for the interests of his country. He needed to buy time. He needed to buy space, to provide a buffer zone, knowing that an attack from Nazi Germany was inevitable. So he needed to buy as much time as he could, and a defense in depth. And despite all the condemnations, he knew all the condemnations that would come on him. He went ahead and did it. And then throughout the war, he pursued the post-war borders of the Soviet Union with relentless consistency. I mean, it's inconceivable for Stalin to have said after the war that, oh, we were led by the nose. Churchill and Roosevelt led me by the nose. They didn't do that. You know, because it was exactly the same situation. Churchill and Roosevelt had no intention of making any concessions to the Soviet Union. They were forced to make concessions because of the victories of the Red Army. And incidentally, this was I mentioned this before in a live stream. This was highlighted in an article by Sergei Lavrov recently, that the concessions that the Soviet Union won after World War II came about only after the big, great victories of the Red Army. And then it was only then that Churchill, flew to Moscow, I think in October 1944, and then signed the percentages agreement. Up until then, there was absolutely no. And again, it was only after the victory at Stalingrad that that Churchill and Roosevelt at the conference on Tehran basically, agreed to Stalin's proposal of the Soviet Union's western borders and the Polish that Poland would just be picked up and dumped westward. But up until then, they were not willing to make any concessions. But once the Red Army had secured these victories, then they would have to do it. But the point is that Stalin was not basing his ideas on any kind of assurances from his Western partners. I mean, what kind of an idiot believes what your Western partners tell you? Of course you don't. So that's why he would never have said, "Oh, we were led by the nose." And then Fahad says, Putin doesn't understand the West. I think that's that. I think you're right. And it says, and the Fahad goes on, Russia didn't supply Syria and Iran with the S-400s, but gave Turkey that. What kind of an ally is that? Yeah, no, exactly. That's exactly right. Syria had no air defenses. That's why it was always vulnerable to attacks from Israel. Israel bombed Syria on a regular daily basis. They never got the S-400s, and Iran never got the S-400s. But Erdogan, he did get the S-400s, and I don't know what the rationale was. That somehow Erdogan was going to leave NATO and he would become an ally of Russia's. Of course, Erdogan has not the slightest intention. Turkey is never going to leave NATO. It's not going to happen. Turkey is not going to be an ally of Russia's. So yeah, that was. I mean, you're absolutely right. I agree entirely with your analysis, Fahad, and thank you so much for your generosity. I really appreciate that. But I wish I didn't have to agree with your analysis, but there it is. It's a very dark day. I mean, in every sense. I mean, so it really isn't good. But anyway, I've gone on for a long time. So thank you very much, everybody who joined us in our live stream. Peter had to leave early. And I will be back tomorrow doing my solo, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Please join me. It's always a lot of fun. And then Fahad goes on. Putin hasn't learned anything from the past 20 years of betrayals from the West. I agree with you, because it's like we're always back at the same situation. We're always being led by the nose. I mean, these people will always lie to you. You have to sort of pay attention, and yet at the same time, if I was to try to figure out what Russia's doing now, I have to think they're waiting for Trump. And they're waiting for Trump to come up with some kind of a plan that they can sign on to, which will obviously be a dud. Because I don't understand otherwise what they're doing. But anyway, we'll talk about that more tomorrow. But I agree. I mean, it's that Putin seems to have less of an understanding of the West than does Lavrov. But I don't think Lavrov has a lot of power. He's just a smoothie, a diplomatic smoothie. But I think that he, I don't know, seems to have a greater understanding of the West than Putin does. But anyway, we'll talk about more during the live stream tomorrow. So thank you very much, Fahad. Really appreciate that. Anyway, 3 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Please join me. Thank you, and all the best. Good night.